Hey guys, Chris Boersma here from Team K-Tune Boersma Racing. On this week's update, we're going to be talking about turbochargers. We've been running a turbo in our car almost since day one. I think we ran maybe one or two events all motor and then quickly bolted on a turbo onto the car. So we have quite a bit of experience with making turbochargers work on front-wheel drive Hondas. And a company that we've been working with for many years now is Garrett. They built some of the best turbochargers, I think, in the market. And they've really been key and instrumental with our success. So one of the things that we've done as we've kind of grown through our time attack career is we started off on it was a Garrett, I think a GT28 RS, like a disco potato turbo is what we first bolted on the car. Very first kind of upgrade that we did. It was a used turbo that we grabbed off of one of our friends. We had an HKS log style manifold, basically kind of bolted everything up and had really good success with that. I think we made over 300 wheel horsepower on a stock 1.6 liter. Eventually that motor blew up. I think we put in a 1.8 liter GSR motor, still on the disco potato, and wound up making, I think, high 300 wheel horsepower. Eventually, as we started to kind of upgrade the bottom end and get things, going a little bit more serious, we started kind of working our way up the different turbocharger offerings that Garrett had at that time. Most recently, we actually made a switch from a GTX 28 to a GTX 30 a couple seasons ago, trying to make more horsepower. And as part of that evolution, Garrett has come out with some great new turbochargers along the way. So originally we made the switch when the GTX turbos were available. So that was a generation 1 turbos. So our first turbo was a GTX 3076 Gen 1. And then recently they've come out with the generation 2 turbos, which have actually opened up even more horsepower available in the same packaging. So what they did with the Gen 2 turbos was they actually redesign the compressor wheels in order to get more flow and then unlock more horsepower. So what we've actually been able to do with these turbos is pretty unbelievable. So we're still running a GTX 3076. When we started with the Gen 1, we were around 500 horsepower. I think at most we ever ran maybe 525 of the wheels. After moving to the Gen 2 turbo, we were able to actually do over 600 wheel horsepower on the same turbine housing that we were running before. It was like 604 to the wheels basically on that turbine, which is pretty impressive when you think about it. Not having to change really anything. We basically just unbolted our Gen 1 turbo, bolted in our Gen 2, and we picked up 75 wheel horsepower. Just unbelievable when you think about it. Most recently, this past season, we stayed with the same size turbo, but we actually changed our turbine housing. So we actually ran 2 different turbine housings this year. We had a small track turbo setup, which was the GTX 3076 Gen 2 with a 0.81 AR divided twin scroll turbine. And then for the larger tracks, we actually ran a 101 divided twin scroll turbine housing. So on the smaller turbine housing, we made same numbers as before. It was 605 to the wheels and about 400 foot-pounds of torque. And then on the larger turbine housing, we actually managed to run 650 wheel horsepower and 475 foot-pounds of torque, which is crazy when you think about it, to almost, to be that far into the 600 wheel horsepower range. We think that, if we were to maybe turn things up a little bit more, we might have been able to get a little bit more out of it. But, one of the things that we monitor on our turbos is shaft speed. So that's how quickly the turbine shaft is basically spinning. And we were already over speeding the turbo. So we figured probably best not to push it any further. But 650 wheel horsepower is crazy out of one of these turbos. So let's kind of jump in a little bit. I'll give you guys a little bit of an overview of what the turbo looks like and how it basically works. here's our turbo that we actually run. So this is a GTX 3076. It's a Generation 2 turbo, and this is actually our large turbine housing that we run. It's actually wrapped in a header shield thermal product, which basically kind of helps keep our temperatures down and under the hood. You can see here we're actually running a divided twin scroll turbine housing. This is actually Garrett's Resist turbine housing. These are great products because they use a proprietary blend of metals in the turbine housing, which makes them a little bit more efficient and much better at dealing with high temperatures. And then by running this thermal product on here as well, we actually can help with turbo spool because we're help keeping heat inside of our turbine housing. This product is fantastic. It actually, to test it, after coming back in from being on track, you can actually get your hand close to where the turbo is now and not completely scald yourself, which is pretty impressive. So this is the actual turbo. You can see here, this is the billet wheel inside here. This is what they actually wound up changing on the Generation 2 versus Generation 1 GTX turbos. The Generation 1, the GTX turbo already was kind of the biggest change that they made versus a GT turbo. It was a billet compressor wheel, and it was all new aerodynamics with the wheel design, which made the turbos much more efficient and capable of generating much more horsepower from a smaller package. With Generation 2, they've gone through and updated the aerodynamics again to try to make them more efficient and be able to actually generate more horsepower. You can see here on the side, all of the Garrett turbos come with a turbine speed sensor port. The Generation 1s, you actually had to machine this yourself, but on the Generation 2, this is actually already done for you. So actually getting a turbine sensor speed or speed sensor in there is actually really easy. You basically just take this bolt out and then you put your sensor in, you measure the depth, and you're basically good to go, which is really awesome that they did this, because this was really hard to do on your own unless you had a machine shop that was comfortable machining this kind of opening in here and drilling into the turbo. Not something you generally want to do on your brand new, expensive turbo, but it's nice that they actually do this from the factory now. So if we flip the turbo over here, this is basically the turbine wheel. So when you put this all together, basically what's happening is your exhaust is kind of coming in here and spinning this turbine shaft, and this wheel is basically kind of spinning, and then that's connected to the compressor, and the compressor is also spinning and basically sucking in air, compressing it, and then shooting it out of your outlet here, which then goes to your intercooler to be cooled down. So it's a pretty ingenious system. I'm not going to go into the turbocharger basics. There's lots of videos that kind of explain how these really cool pieces of technology work. I'm also not an expert, so I'm not going to get into too many of the details. But one of the things that is really cool about this turbo is really just the work that they've done on the compressor side to really make this turbo as efficient as it really is. It's impressive to say that a small turbo, when you look at this thing, it's really not that big, and we're able to generate so much horsepower from such a small package. It really blows my mind. One of the things that I don't think people necessarily realize with these turbos is you're actually able to really do quite a bit with a small package, and that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit more once we jump back to kind of more overview of what we're doing with the turbochargers. So let's jump back in and talk a little bit more about how we're using these turbos. All right, so I'm holding the turbo right now in my hand. You can actually get a sense for how small this package is when I'm actually holding it. It's a little bit heavy, but it's really not that bad. So one of the big things that we did this year, that probably wouldn't get away with a lot of other turbos, is we oversped this turbo quite a bit. Not this specific one, this is a brand new turbo, but the ones that actually in the car right there, we had this problem this year where we wanted to make more horsepower at some of the bigger tracks, but we wanted to stay in this smaller packaging of a 30 series turbo. And so basically what we did was we talked with the engineers at Garrett and asked them, what is your turbo speed? What's the max speed that, we want to try to stay under at that point? And they told us what that value was. And then we basically put the car on the dyno, we put the larger turbine housing in, and we hit that, that shaft speed limit pretty quickly. And then we just kept going. And we wanted to see really how far we could push this turbo. And one of the things that really blew my mind this year was we actually ran the entire season on a turbo that we oversped. We didn't really have any problems with it. It kept on ticking the entire season, and it really allowed us to kind of basically hit the number that we were looking to hit, which was that 650 wheel horsepower mark and close to 500 foot-pounds of torque. And that really helped us this season. And I was really impressed by the quality of the Garrett turbos, the fact that they were able to do this. I know a lot of other turbos, if you overspeed them in the slightest, they will fail either immediately or shortly thereafter. And this, this turbo basically stood the test of time this entire season, and we ran, over 10 events, multi-day events, and turbo's still in there. It's happy as can be. Really no issues. So I was really impressed by that. A lot of people ask us, why would you do that? And why is that such a problem on these Honda cars? There are a lot of other cars that can generate similar horsepower numbers with this size turbo. And one of the things that people don't necessarily realize when you're picking your turbocharger is you really have to look at your engine. Not every engine is the same. And this is something that's really important when you're going through and you're doing your turbocharger analysis in terms of what you want to run. Garrett has a fantastic site where you can actually, they call it their boost advisor. Basically, you put in a whole bunch of different information about your engine, and it will basically recommend a turbocharger. One of the things that people don't realize about Honda engines is they're actually a very efficient engine. So their VE ratio is very, very high. And what that means is they can actually pump out quite a bit of air. Because they're so efficient. The B series is a little bit, I should say, a lot less efficient than a K series. But even a B series is significantly more efficient than a lot of other engines out there. If we were to compare it to a Evo or even the Subaru engine, and other 4 cylinders that are turbocharged, it actually is way more efficient than those engines, especially considering we run over 10.5 to 1 compression. These motors move a lot of air given their small displacement. So even though this is only a 1.8 liter a 1.8 liter engine, it has the ability to oversaturate a turbo very quickly. And that's basically what we're seeing. So when we're looking at the turbine speed, basically what you're watching for is how much output of air is coming out of your engine, and how quickly that's kicking that turbo wheel, basically that turbine wheel, right? It's going to start kicking up based on the exhaust hitting it. And once that starts to overspeed, you can get into a situation where basically you have a bearing failure or the turbo itself basically just explodes, which is a catastrophic failure. And so that's a really hard thing on these cars. It's one of the reasons why generally when Honda people ask us what size turbo they should be running, generally you want to go a little bit larger than you would on maybe some other cars. We've tried to walk a line with this 30 series turbo where we still have a really good responding turbo in the sense that we're getting full boost around 5,200 RPM, and we're able to carry that power all the way to almost 9,800 RPM. So we're trying to make as wide of a power band as we possibly can, especially given the fact that over the last couple of seasons, we're using an OEM gearbox. Our gear spacing isn't necessarily exactly the way that we want it. So we typically only run at most tracks maybe 2 or 3 gears. So we really want to maximize the width of our power band as much as possible. Next season, that's going to be a very different story. We have a lot of different changes that are coming in. We're actually going to be moving up to a larger turbo. And we're going to be changing our gearbox in order to accommodate that. But it's really impressive how even with a 1.8 liter turbo or 1.8 liter engine, I keep saying turbo, we're able to spool some of these very large turbos. So definitely keep an eye out for the turbo that we're going to be running next year. It is a Garrett turbo. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag yet. That will be coming very soon. But we're trying to make as much power as we possibly can. And this turbo right now, I think we're at a point where we've basically kind of maximized it as much as we can. I don't think we're going to get any more out of it. So this is basically the point where we're going to make some changes and hopefully unlock even more horsepower. So that's a kind of a general overview of what we're doing, some of the things to watch out for. I'm gonna just give you guys a little bit of a view of what our actual turbo looks like in the car. So you can actually see here, we're running a tubular manifold. This was made by the guys at KLM. It's actually our own design. It's a twin scroll divided V-band outlet, and we've paired the cylinders in order to maximize the twin scroll aspect of the turbo. So we're capturing the cylinder pairings in order to make sure that we're effectively kind of kicking that wheel up a little bit faster. And what that does is that actually puts the turbo very, very close to the block and the engine, and gives us a lot of space to kind of be able to run a full-size radiator. We also have our wastegate, which is kind of off to the side, not forwards, like a lot of ram horns, where it's kind of like right into your radiator, which is less than ideal for what we're trying to do. So our turbo is actually in a very, very nice spot. You can actually see it down here. I'm gonna get down in here. This is our little intake here that kind of comes off to the side, and then you can sort of kind of see that's where our turbo is right there. So I won't try to snake in anymore, but that gives you a rough idea of how low and how compact this setup really is. And it allows us to basically maximize our space and still have a really fast responding turbo because we have a short runner length on our manifold. Again, I'm not an expert at manifold designs and things like that, but generally this is kind of the feedback that we've gotten from a lot of people that we've talked to, and that's why we chose this design over some of the other designs that are out there. So if you guys are interested in getting a turbo on your car, I would definitely recommend that you guys check out the guys at Garrett. They have a lot of fantastic products out there. There's probably something that will work very well for your setup. They also have recently just released their G series turbos, which are a complete new architecture and design. Turbine wheels have been completely redone. Compressor wheels are completely redone. They have some really good offerings in that series. They actually have what they call their G25, which is capable of running over 600 horsepower, which is unbelievable because that's a turbo that's actually smaller than our 30, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. So definitely check the guys at Garrett out. We've been working with them for many years. We really like the products that they offer. If you have any questions about turbochargers or anything about what we're doing on our car, definitely shoot me a message, reply in the comments. Always happy to chat with you guys. If you guys haven't already, please like and subscribe. We're trying to bring you guys as much content as we can as we're getting ready to build the car. So look forward to bringing you guys some more content, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thanks.